Hello you guys, I'm very happy to finally be able to show the process of these illustrations to you. It's one of my absolute favorites. I think it helped me find a technique that I really love and will hopefully use more of in the future. And I'm super glad that I'm able to show you how I achieved this etched type of look. And this is the digital rough sketch I printed out and used to transfer onto the mixed media paper with the help of a light box. So I heavily prefer using a very hard pencil for these types of sketches, 3H in this specific case. The lines stay relatively light even if I put too much pressure on the pencil, which is something that I tend to lean towards doing most of the time, and the sketch remains very clean because any graphite past H does not, like H or 1H, 2, 3, etc. It usually doesn't smudge very easily, and so I really like the cleanliness that it affords. So before I get into the rest of the process, I just want to quickly let you guys know that I recently updated my shop with new things. At long last. It took me many months to pull together this particular shop update, and I put in a ton of time and effort and love into everything that's been added. I would really appreciate it if you check it out. If you sign up for my mailing list, you will get a 10% off coupon code. I gotta say that I am super pleased with how everything turned out this time around. The quality of the product is exactly what I expected, especially the new sticker set and also the washi tapes. This video features actually the 6th and last sheet of the designs in my new sticker pack, which is called The Scholar. And there's also some new prints. So you can find my shop at cosmicspectrum.art or linked below. It's the best way to support my channel if that's something you'd like to do, and your support is very much appreciated. And will obviously go towards funding my comic, which is in production at the moment. Anyways, back to the video, and like I said, check out cosmicspectrum.art if you'd like to support my channel. So as you can see, I'm just carefully outlining the sketches that I've prepared digitally and trying to keep it as neat as possible so that I don't have to fix anything later on in the process. The paper that I'm using is the mixed media paper by Strathmore. They come in a bunch of different sizes and actually have 2 different sized sketch pads or paper pads, I guess. I really like this paper because it's pretty durable. Like it's definitely thick enough to handle multiple layers of media, but it also is thin enough that it works very well with a light box, because sometimes I find when the paper is too thick, it's really difficult to use a light box with it. But yeah, one of the reasons why I like this paper so much is because it is very smooth, but I find that the texture that it gives when I put down washes of watercolor or ink is still pretty nice. It's not as good as using cold press watercolor paper, which is my other favorite, but I typically switch between these 2 types of paper pretty frequently. I don't know, I can never make up my mind as to which one I prefer, but yeah, I just wanted to let you guys know that this particular one is Strathmore Mixed Media paper. And as you can see now, I'm just doing a rough sketch outline of the 2 character portraits on the top of the page, and I was actually realizing around this time that I seriously didn't put enough work into the digital sketch underneath. It was like way too messy and unresolved, so I was kind of having a hard time being precise with it, so I decided to just roughly outline it using a light box. As you can see, the lines are just like, you know, just to give a guide of rough placement of where things are at, and then I basically turned off the light box so that I could just resketch it and clarify a bunch of the details so that it would be easier to work with going forward, which was a pretty good decision. But yeah, I'm pretty sure I've mentioned this before, but it's always good to spend a little more time on the sketch. Like, I kind of regretted being too lazy when I was doing the sketch for these, because I figured, you know, it's so simple, like half the face is cut off, whatever, like it's not a big deal, and I ended up making the sketches too messy that I couldn't really work with them, so I had to put that extra work in now instead of doing it digitally. So, you know, the work has to be put in regardless of when you're gonna do it, I guess. And yeah, the hand that you can see me draw right now, actually, I end up redrawing again later because I just wasn't very happy with it, but yeah. I think at this point in the process, I wasn't 100% sure if I'm going to ink these drawings or just go straight in with washes of watercolor or ink to fill the colors or whatever, if that makes any sense, because that's kind of the approach that I took in the previous sheet of designs from my sticker pack. But with this one, I figured since the sketches are kind of rough, and even though I did spend some time clarifying them, the sketches that you see of the characters on top there, they're definitely not clean enough to just go straight in with ink washes on top of, because there's a bunch of, like, you know, not exactly resolved lines, and it's still a little bit messy for my standards. So at this point is where I pretty much decided to just ink the entire thing, even though if you can see how clean the other sketches are, I wasn't planning to ink it from the get-go. So it's a little bit repetitive, but I think it was still a good decision in the end, because I do really like the look of the finished product, and it's, like, honestly one of my favorite things that I've done so far. So I'm glad I did it the way that I did. And I don't know, I guess maybe it's like redundant to go over the process in such detail, but I feel like sometimes it's good to be spontaneous when it comes to these decisions, and I always find that I get slightly different results, and that's how I will slowly inch toward the process that I find the most appealing and that I will stick with. So as you can see, I'm editing this video in a similar way that I've been editing my recent traditional process videos, where I will just cut a bunch of real-time footage in short segments. And I wanted to do that for this one, especially because I wanted to show you guys how meticulous I am when it comes to lines. And I actually wanted to talk about digital inking versus traditional inking for a minute, because it is something that I switch back and forth a lot. And one of the biggest differences between traditional and digital inking for me is this particular, I guess, the differences between digital and traditional art for me in general, not specific to inking. It would be this part where traditionally, obviously, I don't have any room to make mistakes, and that really forces me to slow down, especially during the line art step. And so I actually end up finishing inking a piece much faster that way, because when I draw digitally, I tend to just quickly make lines, and then if I'm not happy with it, I'll just click undo and just do it over and over again until I get the right line, which in the end can add up to way more time spent inking a piece rather than just taking slightly longer to put the line down initially, but having to do it only once for each line. So yeah, I don't know if that's like something that everybody knows about, but I just thought I'd mention it quickly. And yeah, that is one of the things that I really like about traditional art in general. Sometimes I will change the shapes slightly when I'm inking over a relatively clean sketch, just to kind of perfect them a bit in my little way, I guess. Some of the stuff that's like the easiest to draw for me is probably flowers. When I was watching back this video, or when I was watching the footage as I was recording the voiceover, I noticed that I tend to go way faster when I draw flowers or ink flowers for some reason. Probably because I've done it so many times at this point. But yeah, I don't know. Just an observation. Oh yeah, another thing I wanted to mention is, as usual, I diluted the ink that I'm using. So it is a brown. I believe usually I will mix black ink with some sort of brown or sepia ink, and we'll put some water in it to just slightly subdue the saturation of the ink so it's not so dark on paper. And as you can see here, I actually inked certain parts of the drawing with a more brown ink, like a warmer brown ink. I don't know if it's probably not noticeable on footage, but I guess specifically I use it for the socks, if you can tell, and to write down the text or the cursive text. But yeah, I feel like while I was doing this, I did realize that I kind of wanted to dilute the ink a little bit more, but you know, once I started, it was kind of too late, so I just rolled with it. And another thing I wanted to mention is that once I do finish inking and erase out all the leftover pencil, it does tend to pick up a little bit of the ink when I erase the pencil, which is actually an effect that I like because it further kind of knocks it down a bit tonally, so that when I put in washes of color over top, it just gives it a softer type of finish, and I think it kind of contributes to the vintage look that I end up with. Okay, so I also wanted to mention that I did lose some of the footage in this video, and it is kind of unfortunate. I don't really remember what happened. I think my camera died and I just really wanted to finish it, so I charged it, and while I was charging it, I did a segment of this illustration without recording it. But in the end, I don't think I missed anything too important, and I think everything that I actually wanted to talk to you guys about and describe in detail is still in the video. So as you can see, it's a little bit of a jump. So what happened between the previous piece of footage and this one is I basically just mixed two colors, the dusty rose pink type of color and the yellowish green. It kind of almost looks like a brown, the color that I used for the leaves of the roses or the flowers. I think I mixed like a little bit of black with ochre and some sort of, actually it may have just been black and ochre, so it kind of looks green, but really there's no green in there, so I think just the contrast is what makes it look green. And what I'm doing now is filling in the metallic parts of the drawing, which are obviously the scissor design, the candle holder, and all the keys, and also just evenly kind of spread this color wherever I want, wherever I deem necessary in the other little illustrations, just because I want to retain a cohesive color scheme. So I typically just pick one color at a time and see where I can put it little by little into every part of, into each design, I guess, if I can. So yeah, for these scissors and like for the rest of the metal parts, I mixed a couple of different colors together, so I more yellow lighter color, and I really like this one ink. I think it's like burnt sienna or something. I use that one a lot, so I probably mixed it with some brown or one of the other colors. Typically I will pull out a bunch of colors before I start the coloring process, just so I know the general color scheme. So I guess it's a little bit of pre-planning there, but yeah, I tend to just test it out on a piece of paper just to see that the colors will mesh together well. But at this point, sometimes I don't even do that anymore because I am kind of used to picking very simple color schemes, and it tends to work out more often than not. So yeah, as you can see, this is just me putting down very flat washes in just to cover areas, and I really like how nice the texture is on top of this mixed media paper. Like, you can do pretty smooth washes if you do them quickly, but you can also get nice like bleed looking effects with watercolors or ink. I actually think I used a little bit of watercolors in this one, but I can't be 100% sure because I did it quite a while ago. So yeah. One of the things I really like about this process that I have zeroed into at this point is that I don't have to do much more than just putting down flat washes when I color these pieces, because I take care of all the details in the next step afterwards. And there's only very few parts in which I will kind of add some very rudimentary level of rendering, I guess, as you might call it, as you can see me do right now with the socks. But for the most part, as you can see, everything is relatively flat, but the texture of the ink wash is what really helps to lay the nice foundation on top of which I can add a lot of details, and it actually really enhances the look at the end when I'm done with the illustration. So it's a very simple process, but I think it's very effective for how long it takes, because it doesn't take like too long, you know. It's definitely not the same as like meticulously painting every detail and getting into the shadows and the highlights with paint, or I guess with ink in this specific case. But yeah, this is one of the things that I always tend to go for, trying to minimize the effort and the time it takes to complete an illustration while still retaining a high level of detail and having it look polished and complete. So yeah, I'm very pleased with this process that I've been doing mostly this year. I guess I kind of started doing it late last year with Inktober, but yeah. So as you can see, I'm just picking different colors from my set of Polychromos pencils and going over the details to add some shadows. And I guess most of what I do with the Polychromos pencils is adding shadows. As far as I remember, I don't really go into the highlights at all. So actually, now that I mention it, I should probably specify that when I do the ink washes, I will intentionally leave out highlights as I'm doing them because of what I just mentioned, because it's kind of difficult to put highlights in afterwards with ink or pencils. With pencils, I guess it's kind of possible. Like they're a little bit opaque, but they're not opaque enough to cover over a very dark area, so it's easier to just leave out the highlights where I want them. Sometimes if I really feel like I didn't leave out enough highlights, or I want to further accentuate them, I will just grab my acrylic gouache paint and use that to put in some highlights. But I try to avoid that because like I mentioned, I do like to keep the process relatively simple, so I prefer to stick to as few mediums as I can to achieve the look that I want. And so for this particular process, I like to just stick to pencils and like colored pencils and ink, and that seems to do the job very well for me. So as you can see, adding shadows with pencils is a pretty slow process, so I tend to work my way towards the darker tones. I usually do those last, so I will save the darkest pencils, like the dark brown and the black, for last, so that I can determine where the darkest areas should be. And so the last thing that I wanted to talk about is this hatching technique that I've started implementing here and there. It's something that I kind of forget about because it's relatively recently that I started adding it to my illustrations, but essentially I just try to do small but clear hatch lines and make sure all of them are going in the same direction, regardless of where they're placed on the illustration. And you know what, I don't know if it's just me, but it is kind of hard to keep them all going in the same direction. Like, I noticed that even in this illustration, the angle sometimes varies just a bit because I'm very used to rushing and I just kind of do things pretty quickly and rely on my instincts. But for this particular decision, or to kind of I guess go with this look, it is really important to pay attention, and you actually have to like pause and make sure that the hatching is in the exact same direction as everywhere else in the illustration. And yeah, sometimes I just get it slightly wrong and it's really irritating, but overall I think I did a pretty good job in this illustration, and thus it became one of my favorites because I think this adds such a nice texture to the drawing, and I think it gives it a lot of character, and I really think it kind of elevated my work once I started using it. So I hope I don't keep forgetting to use it, because I know that I've made a couple of illustrations lately where I just kind of like totally blanked and didn't even think of it. But yeah, hopefully in the future I will utilize it more often. So here we are at the very last part of the process, where I decided to add a little bit more to the illustration by using gold ink. And so I got some of my gold mica ink, or mica, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, by Kuretake. I highly recommend it. It's super nice. I've been using it for years. It keeps very well. Some of the other gold or metallic inks that I've had have actually dried up after a couple of years. I don't know if I just failed to store them properly, but this one is still good and I still use it pretty frequently. So I just basically went over all the jewelry areas that I intended to accent using this gold ink, and then when I was done with that, I actually thought that it would be nice to bring some of it into the rest of the little designs as well. So as you will see me do, I will basically go around every single illustration and just like add a little bit of gold here and there. I think it really adds a nice effect to the overall look, and it's cool that it obviously looks a lot better in person because it is very shiny, the gold, but it's not completely lost when you scan, or like when I scan the drawing in. So that's kind of cool too, because usually I would expect stuff that interacts with light on paper. It doesn't really show through in the scan, but this is not that bad, and you can definitely still tell once I've scanned these in. One thing I kind of had trouble with was adjusting the colors afterwards, because the pink on Noelle's sweater was kind of tonally close to her hair, and it kind of sucks. Like, I regret not spending more time adjusting the illustration, because I think some of the orange tones, like the more warm tones in her hair, got lost, and it became more of a cool red, and it kind of almost blended in with her blouse a little, which I thought was like really unfortunate because it's not the way that I intended it to look. But in the end, I still think the printed version turned out really nice. And yeah, actually, that being said, I am super excited to finally have the sticker sets that this illustration is intended for up in my shop. And I also one of my friends suggested that I use these designs to make washi tapes, because, you know, why not? That's typically how stationery collections are approached, and I couldn't believe that I never thought of it before, because I have so many of these little illustrations. And so I put together a set of washi tapes, which also turned out amazing, which you can also find in my store, which I updated actually today, but it will be yesterday when I post this video. So yeah, it's been kind of a hectic week with the shop update, but yeah, I really hope you guys check out my shop, and I hope you liked this video and liked my explanation of all the little, I guess, parts of my process. I do like to look back on it and analyze it sometimes. I think it helps me kind of zero into my preferences. But yeah, hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!